We've made some great progress with our forum, and we're really close to being able to set up a database and make our data persistent. I'm very excited about that. But before we start working with Firebase, let's fix a couple of small things. In the last lesson, I noticed an issue on the Vehicles forum page listing out all the threads. You'll see the replies column is off by 1. That's because we were counting the initial post as being a reply. Let's change that in threadlist.view to use the thread.replies count that's now available via the thread getter. Thread is provided as a property to the threadlist component. Let's make sure it's the thread from the getter that actually has a replies count property. The thread list component is used in forum.view. We see the thread list component is passed a variable called threads, which references a computed property. Let's alter the forum page's computed prop to get each thread using the dynamic getter. Instead of filtering through all the threads, we can now use .map on the forum's thread property, which is an array of thread IDs. And for each thread ID in forum.threads, we'll call the getter. Cool, that's looking good. Let's add one more post for good measure. Yep, now those thread counts are consistent. Great. Another issue I see on the thread page is that all the users are said to have 107 posts. This is not accurate. Let's fix that. This page is powered by the thread show.view component and uses the post list component to display the associated posts. In a previous lesson, we used a Vuex getter to retrieve the auth user along with the auth user's post count. Let's refactor just a little bit to make a getter that applies to any user so that we can use the native JS getter posts count on the thread page as well. We'll create a new dynamic getter called user. It will look a lot like the thread getter from the last lesson, returning a higher order function with an ID argument. Now, we'll cut the code from inside the auth user getter and paste it into the new user getter. We'll need to change out state.authID here for the ID passed into the anonymous function. This, of course, has broken the auth user getter, but reviving the auth user getter is now as simple as calling the new user getter on the auth ID. We can access other getters from inside a getter by adding a second argument to the function we use to define the getter. Wow! Refactors are really simple when your code structure is well thought out and executed the first time around. That should do it for the Vuex store side of things. Now let's use the user getter over in postlist.view to display the proper post count. We can replace the call to find by ID in the user by ID method with the user getter. Find by ID can also be removed, as it's no longer in use. In the template area, we now have access to the posts count on the user getter. In the mockup, I also see that each postcard has the user's total thread count as well. Let's not upset our designer by forgetting to include that. Luckily, the user getter has a threads count getter on it as well. Easy enough.